Hey guys, it's TheFrXion here, Tank12, however you call me, I don't really care. Welcome back to World of Tanks, where we're today reviewing the AMX 1375, and yeah, I have a little bit of a headache. Oh god, I can't even speak anymore, so bear with me. Things are going great otherwise. Thanks for all of the new subscribers and the ones that have been sticking with me for a while now. Just, I need to get a little bit of time. There's very limited amount of time right now, so I have to make the best of it. So sometimes maybe I will not be as thorough with my reviews as I'd like to be, but I really want to put out this review to be done with the AMX 1375 because I want to move on to the Batchat 12T, and I want to be able to move on to the other premium tanks that I wanted to review as well. And also, while I'm recording this, the Onslaught game mode right now has been activated, and I wanted to make some videos of the Onslaught game mode, which is running like really late, so I'll have to catch it right now. Tomorrow morning I have the day off, but after that I have to go to work, but we're gonna work everything out, don't worry. So, the AMX 1375, this is the tank you get after the 12T, and it's finally a new platform. This is now a completely new vehicle with a new turret, a new hull, but the same old SA50 gun that you have on the AMX 12T. Now that is one of the major problems with the AMX 1375. You go up one tier, but you still have the same amount of penetration, and you also only carry in total 36 rounds. 36 rounds will not be enough in the game, and you'll see that just how difficult it is to utilize all the ammunition correctly, and you actually have to be really selective in what you want to shoot and what not to shoot. But we're gonna get to that in just a second. Let's take a look at all of the modules. You have a new radio, you have a new engine, and you have the new tracks. One of the things I would go for immediately is the tracks, and then I would go for the engine. Now, the thing is, since you already have the SA50, you will not have to play the SA49. I do assume you have unlocked the SA50, which you have. You have to do it to get to the AMX 1375. So you can immediately start with the new gun. So everything sounds worse, right? It sounds like it's a tank that is a tier higher, but that is worse in a lot of respects because it now lacks the penetration that it had at tier 6, but it no longer has a tier 7, because having 145 millimeters of penetration or 144 is just not going to cut it, right? And also, you don't carry a lot of ammunition. Yes, that's true, but the carriage that you have right here, and I'm talking about the platform itself, is finally upgraded, and this is where the strength lies with the AMX 1375. I think the French light tanks are really interesting because they go a very different route from a lot of the tanks in World of Tanks, because they don't distinguish themselves from having like a really good gun, but they have several different things. Let's go to the tech tree real fast, and I'm going to show you guys what I mean with that. First, to start with the AMX ELC Biz. This tank has a 90mm gun at tier 5, is incredibly stealthy, but lacks like the gun depression, it lacks the rate of fire, but it has this 90mm gun, which is a very novel thing at tier 5. Then you get to the AMX 12T, which is a completely different tank, larger, bigger, but has an auto-loading gun and also a very good 75mm gun that we're using right now. So the 12T is really nice. It's all about the gun. The tank is still very good at being a scout, but the platform itself, I think, is not as good as the AMX. It's a lot more stealthy. It's a very different playstyle. Then you get to the AMX 1375. This is the time where the platform really kind of outshines the gun, and the mobility, the speed and everything along it really become really interesting. Then you finally get to the Batchat 12T, the gun becomes much better, the platform improves as well, and you have like this very interesting light tank slash assassinating medium tank that is able to do some damage, and then you go back to the AMX-13 and you have the 90mm gun, and finally it's all about the 105mm gun on the AMX-13 105. So, you know, changing between these platforms is really interesting because it changes things up quite a bit, but it also shows you that the 13, the AMX-13 platform, which the French actually did sell quite often and exported for quite a while, just shows you that this is a real good vehicle. So let's go into the firepower tab. Let's talk about this. As I mentioned, it is very underwhelming. 135 alpha damage. It's the same gun as on the AMX-12T. 144 millimeters of penetration. Against medium and light tanks, you will be able to do damage, but against those tank destroyers and heavy tanks, you're gonna have a very tough time. The rate of fire is decent, but the problem is just that you don't have a lot of ammunition, 36 rounds in total. And if the game actually goes on longer, it actually does become an issue. The in-between reload between the shots is still 2 seconds, 4 seconds, or 4 shots in your total clip, so it's the exact same size as with the 12T. And the gun traverse is fairly nice, 49.07 degrees per second. If we compare that to the tier 6 real fast, we can see that it is better by a little bit. No, actually, yeah, it's just better by a very tiny amount. You have finally 6 degrees of gun depression. I think it's the same as on the 12T. 9 degrees of gun elevation, which is a massive problem with this tank. But it's not just going to be this tank. There are going to be other tanks that also have very bad gun elevation. So whenever you're fighting with this tank downhill, keep in mind that when you're trying to shoot something above you that is elevated, you're going to have a very hard time, and you always have to think twice about maybe pushing down a hill or pushing up a hill. The aim time and dispersion both are perfectly fine, 1.88 seconds for a fully aimed and reticle, or 0.35 dispersion at 100 meters. It's not the most accurate light tank, but I think the gun does work just well enough. Survivability wise, this chassis is just as bad as the 12T, as you can see right here. It only has like 10 millimeters more armor, so the platform really does not distinguish itself by the armor. Everything can penetrate this tank. We don't really have to go into any depth right there. The turret is really bad as well, and you have 850 hit points. These things mean that you'll have to be really cautious when you play at 1375. Mistakes get really punished, and you'll have to be extremely cautious. Let's move on to mobility, and this is where the tank really shines. It doesn't weigh anything, so don't ram any tank. 15.4 tons is currently what I have on this vehicle. The max weight is 16.35 tons. And the engine power is actually at 388. It's 400, but I have chosen a different field modification. What you can see right here is an incredible specific power to weight ratio of 25.2, which will accelerate your tank very quickly. The top speed, as you can see, is at 63 kph because I actually use the valves, which do improve my top speed in reverse and also in going forwards. The traverse speed is also pretty nice, 48.69. That's basically like in the middle upper bracket of a light tank. So mobility wise, this tank is going to get you anywhere and it's not going to have any problems. Maybe you want to improve the top speed and maybe you want to run the turbo, but I think personally 63 kph should be fine and you should have more than enough. Concealment wise, this is what I've tried to train on my vehicle. You can see my crew is pretty bare bones, but I did put the directive in here, so it is as if I have like skill in concealment trained at 100% on every single crew member, and I'm also running the low noise exhaust system because I am using this tank more as a passive scout than as an active scout, because the 75mm gun at tier 7 and 8 and even 9 just becomes a bit useless, and that's where you really have to adapt to the vehicle, and you have to learn how to become a really active scout that is able to scout targets, and in the immediate situation where, like, the emergency situation where you actually have to shoot something, you really have to know where to hit the targets and where you can penetrate them, because as I said, 145 millimeters of penetration is not a lot. Now the view range, we finally do get an improvement. The view range right here now is at 370. Prior it was at 360, so you get 10 meters more base, and obviously you want to improve that with coated optics. So let's talk about the equipment real quick. I went with low noise exhaust system because I want to have more concealment. We could actually switch it between the coated optics because it would give you more concealment, but at the same time, because like this tank only has 432 meters view range right now with the coated optics and not 450, I would much rather keep it in this position. Finally, the last equipment piece, I've used the improved ventilation class to give me a bit of a boost in every single category, but you could also use, personally, maybe the turbocharger, but other than that, I think the tank is perfectly fine. It's fast enough. You don't need any gun rammer, you don't need a vertical stabilizer. You could put it on, but you don't really need it, because I don't think the dispersion is that terrible, and I don't think your accuracy is that bad that you really need to have improved aiming. So having said all that, let's quickly take a look at the field modifications, and we can take a look right into it. So I went with valve tuning. Engine power on this vehicle is amazing already, so you don't really need more engine power. You want to have more kph, more speed, and you also want to have the smallest aiming circle possible, and lightweight spalling protection, which allows you to reverse quicker, but at the same time you take more damage from high explosive shells, which is maybe a bit of a stupid thing to do because people will shoot high explosive when they see you at tier 7 and 8. So, having said all that, is the AMX 1375 a bad scout? I don't think it's a bad scout. I don't think it's a bad vehicle. It's just a vehicle that has some severe restrictions that keep it from being a really good tank. But it's at tier 7, and it's a platform that is also being used at tier 9 and even tier 10, because the 13 series is actually the same chassis that we're using on the tier 9 and tier 10. Just the guns become a bit different. So, I'd say without further ado, let's jump into some games, try out the AMX 1375. I'm going to give you a final verdict, and hopefully you guys have a better picture of what the tank is like. Also, the crew is incredibly bare bones. Only the commander has some skills. I don't have any skills on the gunner or the driver. One thing you have to keep in mind whenever you are playing a French light tank is that they take up a lot of different positions. The commander, for example, is a commander, a radio operator, and a loader at the same time. The gunner, on the other hand, is a gunner, a loader, and just basically, yeah, the gunner and the loader. Now, the final one, the driver, is just a driver, because obviously the driver can't do more than one thing. But yeah, you actually have to have a good crew to make the French light tanks work in the best way possible. Let's jump into the gameplay and see what they are like. Okay, guys, we have a gameplay here at tier 7 and tier 6. Sadly, Wargaming just released the newest patch, and that means for me, all of the old replay files are no longer viewable. That sucks, because I wanted to show you guys one gameplay that was quite a nice display of what you can do with an AMX 1375. But still, this gameplay is good, and it will show off the strengths of the vehicle without any problem. Very first strength that I wanted to address that we have talked about prior in the vehicle preview is that it is quite fast. You can see it accelerates quickly. You know, it reaches the 63 kph top speed quite quickly. Even when you're going uphill, we were going at about 53, 55 kph. Unfortunately, we were just like driving at the same time as this Type 64, so we got into each other's way. But yeah, playing on Westfield and getting into this position in J9, this is one of the places that you want to take early on when you're a light tank. because if you get here, use the bushes correctly, you can spot for yourself, you can shoot these targets for yourself, and you can obviously also spot for your entire team. Now, one of the things that we have to address is the 75mm gun, the SA-50. Now, this gun is by no means bad. This gun still works at tier 7, but you are raised one entire tier now from the AMX 12T at tier 6, you're now at tier 7. That means this gun will have to suffice against tier 9 vehicles. Tier 8 and tier 9 tanks, on the other hand, are going to be quite a challenge with this gun. But, as I mentioned prior in this review, the platform itself is really, really great. The platform is... This is the first time you have this 13, AMX 13 chassis, and it's a great platform. It's fast, it's reliable, and it's small. It will get you from A to B, and you don't have too many issues. There are two big problems with this tank, and these two issues will really give you a hard time. First and foremost, you only have 9 degrees of gun elevation. That thankfully does get resolved at tier 8 with the Batchat 12T. The other thing is, the gun obviously doesn't have the best penetration at tier 7 anymore. 144mm of penetration against tier 7s is fine, but it's kind of scrapping at the bottom of the barrel when you're going up against other vehicles, especially like tier 8s and tier 9s. You're going to have to use the premium shells, which only have 202mm of penetration, which is obviously better than 144, but 202 is nothing too great, even at tier 7 for a premium shell. So, having looked at that, you are also kind of faced with the very big problem that you do not have enough ammunition. I am using the gun a lot on this tank when I play the AMX 1375. It's a very good gun. I think it's a very fun tank to play as well, but you do not have a lot of ammunition. This tank only comes with 36 shells in total, I think, and you can see we are already down to now only having 25 rounds. Now, 25 rounds is certainly something you can work with, but it's not going to be that great when you need more shells. Especially when you're going to be bouncing shots, when you're going to be missing shots, and when you don't have the gun elevation like I do right here to shoot the other tanks. By the way, I run accidentally into a T28 HTC, and since this game is almost over, the HTC and the King Tiger both decide to chase me, and I obviously run into a bloody rock while driving away. Now, spotting-wise, this tank, it's a really good spotter. Yes, it's really good at spotting, but somehow I have to be honest that, generally speaking, I have the feeling players are a lot more suicidal and they decide to throw their lives away very, very quickly when they see a scout. I've noticed that quite often now in the recent few times, and I've noticed that the AMX line, especially the French light tanks, suffer a lot from it because they don't have any armor, right? And you're getting chased down by 4 or 5 tanks. In the end, you still win the game, but since you're at tier 7, and a lot of these players maybe are just intermediates or new players that have finally reached a tank or a tier that is a little bit more competitive, where the specialization really starts to take shape, it's really interesting that all of a sudden there are still like players that are extremely aggressive that, chase you down all the way to get that kill secured. Now, obviously, it's something I would do too if it was my only chance of doing some damage, but I just noticed that instead of winning sometimes, the enemy team tries to maximize their own damage potential because they're kind of very unhappy with the team. So, yeah, this is one gameplay. We're going to move on to another one, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how well this tank can be used as a passive scout. Okay, second game and final one. It's another tier 7 matchup, and this time actually against tier 5 opponents as well. So what I've noticed is tier 9 games, yes, they do happen, but they happen a lot less than I remember. I recall Tier 9 games to be things that happened quite a lot more when I was playing my Tier 7s. Especially my scouts, because light tanks always had some kind of special matchmaking. Now, one thing that is good for that is that you're going to have more damage games, or you're going to have games where you do more damage because you're able to penetrate your opposition. But at the same time, since you don't have the tier 9 vehicles, or a lot less of them, you're going to have less spotting games because the amount of HP that is running around is by far, like, it's halved usually when you're going up against all tier 7 tanks. So let's take a look at this map. We're playing on Lakeville. Lakeville, classic map, very classic, like 3 lanes, middle lane, the left lane, the right lane. The right lane has the city, left lane has that ground that you can absolutely not maneuver on. And we're in a position right here where we're just trying to spot the enemy tanks. And now there's a very uncomfortable situation when you're playing a light tank. That is when another light tank goes into your bush. Now, I was here first, and I always had the idea that who gets here first, who gets, or come first, serve first. And the ELC, when the ELC is behind me and he's shooting, that is going to set me off, because I might get shot by accident. This is a place that is very common for a light tank on this side. And as you can see, having an ELC right next to you is not a very good thing. So I try to say that, I just try to, cement that I was here first. And obviously it doesn't make any sense to have 2 light tanks in one position. Now, I do have 430 meters view range, which is certainly not bad, but it's not that great either. Since a lot of tanks nowadays have a lot more view range, yeah, having like 430 meters view range is not gonna make you the best scout or give you the best opportunity to scout, even at tier 7, because a lot of other players will have invested a lot of resources into good crews and good equipment. But still, when you have the opportunity like right here, you should definitely try to play the middle. The AMX 1375, with its mobility and with its decent camouflage, I would say very good camouflage actually, is going to be able to maneuver into these tight spaces and play the middle. Now, one thing you want to stay away from is certainly premium ammunition or high explosive shells. We just took out the M12 right there, which was a very nice little firefight, but you can also see just how dangerous it is to run around in the middle when you're spotted in the AMX 1375, because we take a very big hit by the Dicker Max, and we are unable to spot that guy because he's hiding his tank pretty far at the back of the map. He's at K9. We actually do see that eventually. But when you're playing a light tank, you obviously are trying to, put yourself into an advantageous position where you can actually spot these guys. But one of the things that I notice is this tank does scout pretty well, but you actually have to rely on yourself most of the time when you're playing a light tank. That means you have to rely on the gun that you have. Because there are no dedicated tanks that will support you all the time. You always have to have like the vision to see who is behind you and who's around you to know if you have support. But I think that with this gun, having an autoloader, having the ability to fight back as a light tank is something very nice and unique for the French light tanks. I think that's one of the key reasons why a lot of people play them, because you can always fight back. You are not as much obliged to have somebody behind you to help you out, but obviously it's gonna help, but it's not like you're completely lost with this tank. The only issue, as I mentioned, is the very bad armor. We don't have enough armor to really deal with anyone shooting us. So that means we have to be extremely cautious with what we do. We got really lucky right there. Dicker Max bounces off our wheels right there, and that's something that doesn't happen most of the time. And thus we managed to get out unharmed. At least we're still like 35 HP deep. But now the very unfortunate thing is that I made a mistake. I drove back a little bit too far and I did drown my tank. That is something that does happen when you play the middle, especially if you play like me. But yeah, the AMX 1375, I think it's not the crown jewel of the line. I think there are certainly better options out there. For example, the AMX 1390 or the AMX, the Batchat 12T, which is really a lot of fun in my opinion. But the 1375 is the very first introduction into the AMX 13 line, and it does some things very good and it does some things fairly bad. So it's like a little bit of a mediocre tank that gets put into the situation right there. But I still think that the AMX 1375 is a fun tank, but it's not like the one of the most enjoyable tanks of the line. I think it's a bit weak because of the lack of gun elevation. I think it's a bit weak because it's using a tier 3, not tier 3, a tier 6 gun. And I just think that it's the first taste for the AMX 1390. That's where the fun really begins, in my opinion. Now, we're going to move on to the Batchat 12T in the next video, and hopefully we can do that soon. But first and foremost, I'm going to give you guys my rating for this tank. And I have to say, out of 10, I would give it a 6.5. Like, if I would give it a rating just purely out of fun, I would give it a 7 out of 10. Because the tank is fun, but there are just too many drawbacks that you cannot ignore when you're playing the 1375. It doesn't have any gun elevation. That's one of the biggest drawbacks. That's 1 point deducted. It doesn't have good standard pen, and it's still the same gun that you use at tier 6, but it's better in a lot of the ways, but it's still a tier 6 gun. That's the 2nd point deducted. The 3rd point deducted is certainly that the view range doesn't increase as much as I would have liked to see it. It's now at 370 meters view range instead of the 360 meters that you have. But still, it's not in the upper echelons that you would want to have for a light tank at tier 7. Other than that, it's a fun tank. The chassis is great, the mobility is great, the concealment is great. The fact that you still have an autoloader is really great. You can always fight back, but you have to fire a lot of gold shells, which is also like at least 0.5 points that you deduct. So that's how we get to 6.5 points. I'm not sure if this rating system makes any sense, but I'm just trying to, take it out of stance, like while standing. I'm not really sure what the right metaphor for it would be, but yeah, I'm just kind of making it up as I'm going, or as we go. And yeah, it's the 1375. It's a fun tank, but there are better ones out there, especially the 1390. So see you guys in the next video. Until then, have a good one. Tell me what you think about the 1375. And yeah, 1357. That is an entire different story. That's a tank we're going to be looking at as well in a premium tank review. That thing is fucking awesome.